Have you ever witnessed a moment where, in just a few minutes, a person's entire life and an entire system was forced to confront itself? A successful, calm, polite black female CEO walked up to the first-class counter with a valid ticket, but in just a few short seconds, she was rejected as someone who didn't deserve to be there. No kind explanation, no minimal respect, just the familiar look of suspicion that too many people have had to endure. And then, she had to choose. Close your eyes and let it go, because it's just a small matter. Or stand up, knowing the price to pay is not small, even $900 million. If it were you, what would you do? Would you dare to touch the pain that has been burning for so long just to change something that seems too familiar? This story is not just about a first-class ticket. It is about dignity, about the limits of silence, about the moment a person calmly says enough. We invite you to join this emotional journey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying the stories that touch your heart. The morning light inside Cedar Valley International Airport felt colder than the air outside. It wasn't the kind of cold that made you shiver. It was the kind that sat on your skin, thin and clinical. The kind that reminded you this place ran on procedure, not warmth. Passengers moved in slow waves through the terminal. Rolling suitcases tapped against the floor in a rhythm that felt almost metallic. Merchants brewed coffee behind glass counters. Voices blended, then dissolved into a soft hum. At Gate B27, the first-class boarding sign glowed in steady white letters. And standing just a few steps from it was Dr. Evelyn Hart. She carried no expensive jewelry, no loudly branded handbag. Her presence was quiet, almost understated yet somehow unmistakable. She wore a navy-tailored suit that framed her posture like a steady line, the kind of line people didn't dare cross. Her curls were tied back in a low bun, and her expression held a peaceful confidence, as if she were simply moving through another ordinary morning. But nothing about this morning would be ordinary. Evelyn stepped forward and offered her boarding pass. Her voice was soft, steady. "Good morning." Behind the counter stood Cole Henders, a gate agent in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, eyes ringed by the kind of tiredness that had turned into impatience long ago. He didn't look up immediately. Instead, he took her pass with 2 fingers the way someone holds something they're already judging. His gaze flicked upward, one glance at her, one glance at the first-class sign behind him. Then a smirk so small it almost hid itself at the corner of his mouth. "Ma'am," he said, tapping her ticket against the counter. "The general boarding line is over there." He pointed toward a long line snaking around a group of families with strollers. His tone carried no misunderstanding. He hadn't asked a question. He'd made a decision. A few people nearby turned their heads. Some looked confused. Others simply looked entertained, the way people sometimes look at drama unfolding that doesn't belong to them. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't frown, didn't raise her voice, didn't even blink faster. She simply breathed in that gentle, measured way she had learned after years of facing rooms full of people who doubted she belonged there too. "Sir," she replied calmly, "this is my line." Cole let out a breath through his nose, sharp and dismissive. He flipped the boarding pass over, pretending to inspect it. The corners of his lips tightened again. His voice lowered, but the sharpness stayed. "Ma'am. First class only." A beat passed. You understand, people behind Evelyn exchanged looks, some awkward, some amused, some quietly agreeing with him. Someone whispered just loudly enough to be heard, "She doesn't look first class." Another replied under their breath, "Probably a last-minute upgrade." Evelyn heard them. Of course she did. Her ears had learned, over decades, to pick up every small signal of doubt. She remained still. Cole's eyes hardened, as if irritated by her silence. He lifted the boarding pass to eye level, then without warning tore off its corner with a single, deliberate motion. The sound wasn't loud, but in that controlled, sterile airport air, it was unmistakable. Rip. A sound sharper than any insult. He dropped the torn pass back onto the counter. It fluttered for a moment before landing upside down. "There," he said. "Now let's not hold up the line." The crowd fell into a strange half-silence, half curiosity, half discomfort. Some people pulled out their phones, not to record, at least not yet, but simply because the moment felt like something about to happen. Evelyn looked down at the torn ticket. Her fingertips brushed the missing edge, and just like that, a memory she hadn't invited returned. Savannah? Georgia. 12 years old. She stood inside a small bookstore, holding a used math workbook she wanted for summer practice. The cashier had looked at her the same way, one glance at her skin, then at the price tag, then at her worn sneakers. The woman had said, "Sweetheart, these books aren't for you. Try the clearance shelf." She remembered her mother's hand on her shoulder, firm, warm, and her mother's voice low but steady. "You don't let the world tell you where you belong. You walk where you're going." Back in the airport, the memory dissolved. Evelyn lifted her eyes slowly. Her face remained calm, but something in her gaze sharpened like steel cooling into its final shape. Cole waited for her to protest, to argue, to shout, to behave like the problem he wanted to label her as, but Evelyn didn't give him that. Instead, she reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her phone. Her movements were unhurried, precise, controlled. She tapped on a single name in her favorites list. Some passengers leaned closer without meaning to. Curiosity had its own gravity. The call connected instantly. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look at Cole. She spoke as if she were handling something far larger than this gate, this airport, this man. "Good morning," she said quietly. "Initiate Phase 1. A pause. Her eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the boarding area. "Freeze all outgoing payments to Sky Continental Airlines. Effective immediately." Silence. Not stunned silence yet, that would come later. This was the silence of people sensing they should pay attention, even if they didn't understand why. Cole blinked, the smirk slipping off his face for the first time. "What? What did you just say?" he murmured. Evelyn ended the call gently, her thumb pressing the screen with the same softness she used when closing a book. She placed the phone in her pocket. Then she looked at him for the first time. Really looked. Her voice was calm, measured, unshaken. "I'm exactly where I belong." And for the first time that morning, Cole stepped back. Not because she raised her volume, but because she didn't have to. Her stillness was louder than any argument. For a moment, nothing moved. The torn corner of Evelyn's boarding pass clung to the counter as if stunned by what had just happened. Cole Henders stared at her with an expression he could not fully hide, something between confusion and the early tremor of fear. Passengers nearby sensed a shift in the atmosphere too subtle for words but too sharp to ignore. It was the kind of silence that stretches just a breath longer than normal, the kind that places a weight on the chest. A woman in a red fleece jacket held her child a little closer. A middle-aged man pretending to scroll his phone lowered the screen by an inch. Even the coffee machine from the stand across the hall paused its steady hissing as if the room itself was listening. Evelyn didn't seem to absorb any of that. Her posture remained steady, her hands relaxed, her eyes calm. She looked like someone who knew exactly what came next, even if the rest of the room did not. Cole's throat tightened. When he finally spoke, the bravado had thinned. "Ma'am, what do you mean, freeze payments?" "Freeze whose payments?" His words landed unsteadily. like shoes slipping against wet concrete. Evelyn didn't answer, not because she didn't hear him, but because he wasn't the person she owed answers to. Before Cole could speak again, a familiar pair of hurried footsteps approached from the side, the kind of footsteps belonging to someone used to being summoned into minor crises. The gate's shift supervisor appeared, her badge reflecting the terminal lights. "Cole, what's the issue here?" Mallory Green, early 40s, hair pulled into a tight braided bun, eyes sharp with expectation. She looked like someone who believed in order above all else. Cole straightened instantly. Relieved. "She's refusing to move to general boarding? First class is for first-class passengers only." Mallory turned toward Evelyn. Something flickered in her expression when she saw the torn ticket on the counter. Her jaw tightened. "Ma'am, we need you to follow instructions. If you continue to obstruct," Evelyn lifted her gaze, "have your internal team check your corporate account ledger. You'll find the obstruction isn't coming from me." The sentence fell gently, yet its weight thudded across the space. Mallory blinked fast. Her hand drifted toward her radio. "What exactly did you do?" A few passengers gasped. Others leaned forward as if they were at the edge of a movie screen. Someone whispered, "Is she serious?" and the question floated like dust in the air. Evelyn looked down briefly, tracing the torn edge of the boarding pass with her thumb. She wasn't looking at the paper. She was sifting through an old memory her mind pulled forward without permission. She remembered a boardroom years earlier when she was the only black woman present. A director had handed her a stack of files and said, without looking at her, "Have the notes ready by noon." "Sweetheart?" The room had gone quiet afterward, some people uncomfortable, some pretending not to hear. And she had smiled politely, knowing that the same man would one day need her signature to approve the company's largest expansion. He did. And he never made the same mistake twice. The memory passed, leaving a faint warmth of resilience behind. Back in the present, Evelyn met Mallory's stare again. "Your company receives 70% of its cold chain medical shipments through Hart Biotech Logistics. That includes the high-value materials being transferred overseas today." Mallory's eyes widened. "You work for them?" Evelyn shook her head gently. "I lead them." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It simply filled the space with a truth too heavy to dismiss. A quiet ripple moved through the waiting area. Someone whispered, "She's a CEO." Another voice followed. "Then what is she doing flying commercial?" Someone else replied softly, "Real power doesn't need an audience." Cole's confidence eroded fast. His fingers curled around the edge of the counter. His mouth trembled before words came. You could have just told us." Evelyn's eyes softened, not with pity but with insight. "I shouldn't have to." Before the moment could settle, a new presence entered the scene. A tall man wearing a security uniform approached slowly, hands folded in front of him. Marcus Ellington. Calm-eyed, deliberate in each step. He had been watching long enough to know that something here wasn't what it looked like. "Ma'am," Marcus said gently, "is everything all right?" Cole cut in quickly, desperate for control. "She's refusing to comply and is escalating the situation." Marcus didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Evelyn, reading her posture, her breath, the quiet clarity she carried like a steady flame. "Ma'am," he asked again. Evelyn exhaled once, steady and measured, enough to signal she wasn't threatened. "Everything is fine, officer. But your airline may want to prepare for internal communication within the next few minutes." Mallory frowned deeply. "What communications?" As if in response, an alert chimed from her radio. Then another, then a third. A cascade of beeps echoed like falling dominoes across nearby staff devices. Cole flinched. Mallory lifted her radio. "Operations, this is Supervisor Green." "What's happening?" Static crackled. Then a rushed voice answered, strained and confused. "We're trying to confirm, but the corporate wire system is flagging all outgoing payments to Hart Biotech. Says it's locked, executing something." Mallory stiffened. "Locked by who?" "By the partner account holder," the voice replied, "and the partner is Evelyn Hart." Every phone within earshot seemed to vibrate at once. A few devices flashed news alerts, though the passengers didn't yet know what they said. Curiosity grew like heat rising from concrete. Mallory's voice broke on the edge of panic. "You can't do that. That contract is worth." She stopped. She knew the number. Everyone at the corporate level knew the number. Evelyn held her gaze with a calm that unsettled even those who wanted to defend her. "You tore my boarding pass," she said quietly. "So I tore the illusion that your behavior had no cost." The sentence was soft, too soft, which was why it landed so hard. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "My God." A teenage boy recorded discreetly behind a backpack. Cole's face went pale. He looked at the torn ticket in his hand as if it were a fuse he had lit without knowing. I didn't mean," Evelyn interrupted gently, her voice tinged with something aching and human. "That's the point. You didn't think at all." Marcus Ellington, standing still as a pillar, lowered his head slightly. In that small gesture, Evelyn sensed he understood something the others hadn't yet grasped. He understood the weight of being judged before you spoke a single word. The terminal lights glowed brighter as the afternoon sun began shifting angles through the high windows. The world outside went on as normal, yet the world inside Gate B27 was bending, slowly and quietly, toward a consequence no one could avoid. Mallory tried to regain composure. "Dr. Hart, if we can just reset and talk to corporate is already talking," Evelyn said. A soft vibration came from her phone. She didn't reach for it. She already knew what it meant. Someone in the crowd murmured, "This is going online. Someone's streaming." And it was true. A young journalist, Tanya Brooks, had been quietly filming from the seating row. She recognized a story when she heard the words "freeze payments." Her live stream had drawn hundreds within minutes, and the number was climbing. Mallory, noticing the camera, stiffened. Cole swallowed hard. Marcus remained still. Evelyn didn't look toward the lens. She didn't need attention. She wasn't performing. She was simply standing in the place where she had been told she didn't belong and letting the truth settle on its own. Something in her quietness made the room look inward, even if only for a moment. Behind the glass window, a plane taxied slowly across the runway, its lights blinking like a heartbeat, steady and fragile. Inside the terminal, Evelyn released a slow breath, the slightest softening in her shoulders. "Nothing I did today was loud," she said gently. "But sometimes stillness is the crack that makes the wall fall." No one spoke, not Cole, not Mallory, not even the passengers who loved a viral moment. They all felt it. Something old had been exposed, something long ignored had been named, and the consequences had only begun to unfold. Evelyn gathered what remained of her boarding pass, holding the torn paper between her fingers as if acknowledging the fragility of every space she had ever fought to stand in. Then she whispered to Marcus, almost too quietly for the others to hear, "I belong here, and so do many others who've been told otherwise." Marcus nodded, slowly, with a kind of respect that felt like a steady shield. The room breathed again, but the storm had only started forming, and the world, though it didn't know it yet, was already watching. A low hum drifted across Gate B27 as the tension thickened into something almost physical. People who had only intended to sip coffee or scroll their phones now found themselves rooted in place, watching the quiet storm around Evelyn unfold with a kind of reverent unease. Even those who didn't understand the larger implications sensed something significant was taking shape, something none of them had anticipated when they arrived that morning. Cole stood frozen behind the counter, his jaw half open. The torn boarding pass still lay abandoned where he had dropped it earlier. His fingers twitched as though they wanted to reach for it, as if fixing the paper would somehow reverse everything. Mallory Green kept her radio pressed close to her ear, absorbing updates that grew more frantic with each passing moment. Her eyebrows knit tighter with every fragment of information she received. Whatever she had expected this confrontation to be, it was not this. Evelyn remained where she stood, her posture calm but not rigid, her breath steady. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction in seeing others scramble. Instead, she seemed distant in thought, as though the events in front of her were unfolding behind a pane of glass. It was in that distance that an old memory stirred again, unbidden. She was 13, sitting on a wooden bench outside her middle school gymnasium in Savannah. A boy named Matthew had pointed at her scuffed sneakers, asking loudly why her shoes looked like they had been passed down too many times. A few girls whispered and giggled. She remembered lowering her eyes to hide the sting. Her mother had picked her up that afternoon, sensing something wrong long before Evelyn spoke. Ruth Hart had placed a gentle hand on her daughter's cheek and said with a soft firmness, "The world will try to shrink you. But remember, baby, every time they do, your spirit learns to stretch." Evelyn had held on to that lesson through college, through graduate school, through every boardroom where she was the only woman of color among a sea of voices debating numbers and strategy and vision. Now, inside the airport, the lesson resurfaced like a quiet echo. The present snapped back when Mallory lowered her radio. "Dr. Hart," she said, trying to control her voice. "Our operations department is asking for clarification. They want to know if the financial suspension is temporary." Her tone wasn't confrontational this time, nor was it polite. It was simply nervous. Evelyn responded with a measured calm. "Their question would be better directed to my executive team." Mallory swallowed. This decision, it could affect thousands of people. Evelyn nodded slightly, sadness passing across her features like a passing shadow. "It already has," she replied. "The behavior you tolerated this morning affected one. That is where it began." A hush fell. Some passengers looked down as if suddenly ashamed of not speaking earlier. Others stared at Evelyn with a mixture of admiration and sorrow, realizing the weight she carried simply by existing in a world that demanded proof of her worth again and again. Cole finally found his voice. It trembled. "I didn't know who you were." The words felt inadequate, yet he said them as if they explained everything. Evelyn looked at him gently, not with anger but with a quiet truth that pierced deeper than raised voices ever could. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with dignity." Cole's breath caught, his eyes lowered. The floor suddenly felt like a mirror he didn't want to look into. Marcus Ellington, still standing nearby, shifted slightly. The soft sympathy in his gaze held steady. He had watched many conflicts during his years in airport security, but rarely had he witnessed one this silent and devastating. He sensed that beneath Evelyn's composure lay something deeper than corporate retaliation, something personal, something painful. A voice in the crowd spoke up, a young man in a denim jacket. She didn't deserve that. Another voice answered, "Nobody does." The murmurs spread gently, not loud enough to be chaotic, but strong enough to build an undercurrent of understanding. Evelyn turned away from the counter and walked a few steps toward the large glass window overlooking the runway. The sun had begun its slow climb, casting soft stripes of gold across the floor. Planes moved quietly in the distance, their red lights blinking like steady heartbeats. She let her gaze follow one of the aircraft as it taxied. The steady motion calmed her, reminding her of the countless early morning flights she had taken for work, visiting research sites, meeting partners, advocating for pharmaceutical access in underserved regions. Traveling was part of her life. Airports were familiar terrain. Yet familiarity did not shield her from the parts of the world that still saw her as an outsider. Behind her, she heard Mallory inhale as though gathering herself for another attempt. "Dr. Hart, could we talk privately? Perhaps resolve this before it escalates further." Evelyn didn't turn around immediately. She allowed the question to hang for a moment, letting the reality of the situation breathe. Her tone, when she finally answered, held neither hostility nor softness. It simply held truth. "This didn't escalate because of me. It escalated because no one questioned what was wrong when it began." Mallory's face flushed. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally said, "I understand your frustration." Evelyn turned to face her fully. "This isn't frustration," she said gently. "This is a line crossed more times than most people notice, a line that finally had a consequence attached." Marcus stepped slightly closer, sensing tension but not intervening. He recognized that this was not a conflict requiring security protocol. It was a moment requiring honesty. A sudden chime echoed from the overhead speakers. The boarding announcement for another flight called "Passengers Forward." The sound momentarily pulled attention away from the confrontation, reminding everyone that the world outside this gate continued moving as usual, unaware of the quiet cracking taking place within. Tanya Brooks, still recording from her seat, zoomed in slightly. She whispered for her live stream audience, "This is more than a delay. This is a story about how a single moment shows the cracks in a system." The viewers in her chat began posting comments she could barely keep up with. "This is painful to watch. She's so calm. Why are they treating her like this? Do they even realize what they did?" Tanya looked at Evelyn through her camera lens, sensing the profound stillness around her. It wasn't the stillness of a person waiting for an apology. It was the stillness of someone who had learned to carry her own self-worth no matter how the world tried to measure it. Evelyn stepped away from the window and returned to the counter. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like someone choosing every breath. She picked up the torn boarding pass. She didn't attempt to fix it, nor did she discard it. She held it as if acknowledging what it represented, a quiet harm that seemed small to some, but echoed through a lifetime of similar moments. She faced Cole again. "There will be a report," Mallory said quickly. "We'll make sure corporate reviews everything." Evelyn considered the words. She saw sincerity layered under panic, but sincerity couldn't erase what had been done. "Make sure the report includes his name," she said softly. "And mine." Cole exhaled shakily. He had not expected mercy. He had not expected consequence either. He didn't know which one frightened him more. Evelyn didn't scold him, didn't lecture, didn't raise her voice. Her calmness was a mirror forcing him to see his own reflection. The moment stretched quietly. Then Evelyn turned slightly toward Marcus, giving him a small nod of appreciation. A silent acknowledgement. A thank you for simply seeing her before anyone else did. Marcus returned the gesture with a respectful tilt of his head. And just as the tension finally began to settle, a sudden sound broke through the air. A ping from Evelyn's phone. She lifted it gently, expecting a message from her executive team. But when she saw the notification, her expression changed almost imperceptibly. The airline had already reacted. The consequences of the torn ticket were reaching farther, faster, and deeper than anyone at Gate B27 yet understood. The storm was still unfolding. The notification on Evelyn's phone glowed softly, its light reflected in her calm eyes. She did not move immediately. She allowed herself a full breath before lifting the device and reading the message. To anyone watching, the moment looked ordinary. A CEO checking her phone, a woman passing time during a travel delay, but Evelyn felt the shift before she even opened the screen, a subtle, interior stir. The kind of change that starts as a whisper before it rises into something undeniable. She read the message. Then she lowered the phone slowly. The tremor began. Not around her, but around everyone watching. Passengers leaned forward, sensing something in her stillness. Mallory cleared her throat as if bracing herself. Cole stared without blinking, waiting for the verdict that might rewrite his morning, maybe even his job. Marcus watched with quiet concern, recognizing that whatever was happening was larger than a simple policy issue. Evelyn placed the phone back in her pocket with the delicacy of someone closing a fragile memory into a drawer. Mallory dared to ask, her voice thinner than before. "Is something wrong?" Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. Her expression was not anger. It was something weightier, more complex, as if she were holding an entire history of repeated hurts behind her eyes. "Phase 1 is complete," she said quietly. The words were soft enough that several passengers nearest her leaned in. Mallory clasped her hands together. "I don't understand. What does that mean?" Evelyn glanced toward the wide windows again, where the morning sun continued its slow rise. For a moment, her gaze softened, her thoughts drifting into a place much older than the conflict unfolding at the gate. She remembered being in her college dorm when she first received a rejection from a major research program. The letter never stated it plainly, but she could read between the lines. Her advisor had explained it to her later. "You'll have to work twice as hard," he'd said, not unkindly, not because you lack talent, but because some people are slow to see what stands right in front of them. Evelyn had smiled politely. She had learned early that some truths, even when spoken softly, carried sharp edges. Now, at Gate B27, she returned to the present with a steadiness that made the air feel charged. "My team just confirmed the suspension has been registered by your corporate systems," she said. "They are requesting an emergency call within the hour." Mallory opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, searching for words that refused to come. But, "Surely we can resolve this. There must be a misunderstanding." Evelyn studied her, not harshly but deeply. "The misunderstanding began long before your system flagged the suspension," she said. "It began when I was told I did not belong in a space I had paid for. It began when someone assumed I was lesser without knowing my name." A few passengers looked away, their discomfort rising like heat. Others nodded subtly, acknowledging a truth they had witnessed too many times in their own lives. Cole stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Look, I admit I judged too quickly. I was having a rough morning. We all make mistakes. You don't have to ruin the company over this." His eyes were red around the edges, whether from fear, shame, or both. No one could tell. Evelyn regarded him with a calm that felt almost like compassion. "This isn't about ruining a company," she said softly. "It's about accountability. And sometimes the only way to teach a system to see is to interrupt its comfort." Cole swallowed. His shoulders sagged. Tanya Brooks adjusted her phone, capturing every word for her live stream audience. The comments poured rapidly. "This is intense. She's so composed. Why is this hitting so hard? People need to see this." Evelyn turned her attention to Marcus. "Officer Ellington," she said gently. "You asked if everything was all right. The truth is, it never really is. Not for people like me. But today, it will change." Marcus nodded slowly. He understood more than he let on. "If you need anything within my protocol, I'm here." His sincerity anchored the moment. Mallory took a small step toward Evelyn, her voice trembling as she spoke in a lowered tone, almost pleading. "Dr. Hart, we can issue a formal apology, we can investigate, but the contract, $900 million is—" She didn't finish. She couldn't. Evelyn's voice came quiet and steady. $900 million does not outweigh the dignity of a single person. Some passengers exhaled sharply, others lifted their chins, surprised by the simplicity and conviction in her words. Cole wiped his forehead. "Please, can't we start over?" Evelyn's expression softened subtly. She did not wish to destroy him, nor anyone else. That was not her purpose. "There is no starting over," she replied. "But there is learning, growth, accountability. Those things are still possible." A silence draped over the gate area again. Gentler this time. Suddenly, the airport speakers crackled with a faint announcement. It wasn't about Evelyn's flight. It wasn't about boarding. It was an internal call for all Sky Continental staff supervisors to contact headquarters immediately. Mallory's face drained of color. She lifted her radio again. "Operations. This is Green. What's happening?" A voice answered, flustered and breathless. "Corporate wants a full incident report. They're calling an emergency meeting. We've just had multiple press inquiries. Something's trending online. We're trying to contain it." Mallory looked over at Tanya, who quietly lowered her phone for a moment, her face unreadable. Evelyn turned away slightly, letting her gaze settle on a child sitting with her mother nearby. The girl, maybe 6 years old, watched Evelyn with wide eyes, her expression curious rather than frightened. Their eyes met. For a moment, something gentle passed between them. Evelyn crouched slightly, meeting the girl's gaze on her level. "It's going to be all right," she whispered softly. The girl nodded as if she believed her completely. When Evelyn stood again, her demeanor held a new steadiness. It wasn't the rigidity of someone preparing for battle. It was the quiet poise of a woman stepping into the truth she had carried for years. She turned back to the counter, placing the torn boarding pass on its surface. Her fingertips pressed lightly along the torn edge, not to repair it, but to acknowledge what it represented. Then she lifted her eyes to Mallory. "I will be leaving this gate soon," she said, "but the consequences of this morning will continue, not because I seek revenge, but because change rarely arrives without disruption." Mallory closed her eyes briefly, nodding with resignation. Cole looked down at his hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think. I should have. I know that now." Evelyn regarded him with a quiet empathy that surprised even herself. "Then carry that lesson," she said gently. "Carry it into every day from now on. That will matter more than anything corporate does." Marcus studied Evelyn carefully, seeing in her a strength that didn't flare but radiated, slow and constant like a steady flame. Tanya lifted her camera again. Her voice trembled as she narrated, "This isn't anger. This is a boundary, a line drawn by someone who's had to stand alone too many times." The airport lights shimmered against the growing morning brightness. Conversations resumed in soft murmurs. Phones vibrated with alerts carrying pieces of the story outward, a storm of truth spreading in widening rings. And standing in the middle of it all was Evelyn, still calm, still steady, still choosing her dignity without raising her voice, the kind of woman who didn't need to shout to be heard, because the world had already begun listening. The air around Gate B27 felt thicker now, as if holding its breath. Conversations rippled in cautious waves, rising only to fall back into gentle hushes. The story was no longer contained to the small semicircle around Evelyn. It was traveling from one stranger to another, drifting like a quiet current. Tanya Brooks adjusted her seat. Her phone was still lifted. Live stream rolling. thousands of viewers now watching. She hadn't planned to film anything that morning. She was supposed to be on her way to cover a small community health event in Denver. But the moment she heard the sound of Evelyn's torn boarding pass and the tension that followed, something inside her insisted she keep recording. She had seen many conflicts before, enough to know that most loud stories burn quickly and disappear. But the stillness around this woman, this CEO who spoke softly yet shifted the room so profoundly, held a weight Tanya recognized from deeper truths. Her viewers typed constantly. "She's handling this with so much grace. Why is this hitting me? I've been treated like that before. Keep filming. People need to see this." Tanya zoomed in slightly, capturing the delicate rise and fall of Evelyn's breath as she stood near the counter. It wasn't anger that radiated from her. It was something quieter and far more powerful, a full and unshakable sense of self. Marcus Ellington noticed the growing attention. He stepped closer, not to intervene, but to ensure the space around Evelyn remained safe. Not physically safe. She didn't need protection from anyone's hands. She needed space from the thoughtless words that had triggered this morning's spiral. He spoke softly. "Doctor? Hart? Do you need a separate area, somewhere quieter?" Evelyn shook her head gently. "I am exactly where I need to be." The conviction in her answer moved through Marcus like a steady, grounding force. He nodded, understanding. Across the counter, Cole tried to steady himself. His fingers rested on the counter's edge, tightening and loosening as if he were trying to grasp a memory that refused to settle. His voice, when it finally came, carried the unevenness of someone wrestling with truth. "I didn't think people would care about something like this," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Things happen at airports all the time." Evelyn's gaze shifted to him. "People care when they recognize a piece of their own story," she said quietly. The words were simple, but they landed like a soft unraveling in Cole's chest. Something he had tucked away suddenly felt exposed. Mallory Green paced a short distance away, phone glued to her ear. She was receiving instructions she didn't want to hear. The crease in her forehead deepened with each update. Eventually, she turned toward Evelyn, speaking in a controlled whisper. "Corporate is drafting a statement. They want details from us right now. They said this incident is gaining traction online." Evelyn nodded slightly. "I expected it would." Mallory's voice cracked. "This could put my job at risk." Evelyn's expression softened, though her tone remained firm. "Your job wasn't endangered by my actions. It was endangered by silence when something wrong unfolded." Mallory closed her eyes, the truth pressing into her like an uncomfortable weight. A sudden notification chimed on Tanya's phone. She glanced down quickly, then inhaled sharply. "Oh my God," she whispered. She lifted her camera again. "Dr. Hart, your story is trending nationwide." A wave of murmurs spread through the gate area like a rising tide. People leaned toward one another, whispering, scrolling, watching. Screens began lighting up with headlines. Evelyn's name appeared again and again. A soft rustling sound filled the area as passengers turned their screens her way, absorbing the unfolding narrative. Some frowned with empathy, others looked thoughtful, as though reflecting on their own experiences. Evelyn didn't check her phone. She sensed the shift through the room itself. It was not pride she felt, but a heavy, reflective sadness. This moment, which should have been quiet and ordinary, had become something more because it touched a shared wound, one she had carried long before this morning. Tanya approached slowly, still filming but respectful. "Dr. Hart, would you like to say anything for the record?" Evelyn took a moment before answering. Her voice remained low, each word a deliberate choice. Dignity should not be newsworthy, But if telling this story helps someone else claim their voice, then I'm willing to stand in it." Her answer made Tanya swallow tightly. She lowered the phone for a moment, letting her viewers sit with the weight of that truth. Cole stepped forward then, his voice barely audible. "People are calling me a villain online," he said. "I didn't mean this, any of it." Evelyn studied him, her eyes softening with a depth that carried years of disappointment and understanding. "It's not about labels," she said. "It's about impact. What you intended and what you caused are not the same. The question is what you choose to do with that understanding from this point forward." Cole's breath hitched slightly. He nodded, though shame reddened his cheeks. A pause followed, a moment of quiet that allowed the room to breathe again. Then a voice rang out from behind the cluster of passengers. "We're with you, Dr. Hart." It was a woman in a gray coat, her voice steady. She added softly, "My son went through something similar last month. People need to see this." Another voice chimed in. "You're not alone." A man nodded. "Thank you for not yelling. Thank you for showing another way." The support flowed gently, not loud or frenzied, but warm and real. It wrapped around the space like a soft blanket. Evelyn blinked, moved by the quiet solidarity. It wasn't applause. It wasn't praise. It was recognition, and that meant more to her than anything else. Mallory watched the scene with a mixture of guilt and revelation. She realized she had spent too many years thinking incidents like this were small, isolated, or insignificant. Now she understood that each moment carried weight far beyond itself. The overhead speakers chimed again, announcing a new boarding schedule for unrelated flights. Life around them continued as if nothing was happening, yet everything had shifted. Evelyn turned toward Marcus, who stood steady as ever. "I appreciate your presence," she told him. He inclined his head. "Sometimes standing nearby is the most supportive thing a person can do." Evelyn smiled faintly. It was brief, but it carried sincerity. Then Tanya, sensing the story deepening, lifted her phone once more. "Dr. Hart, people are asking, what comes next?" Evelyn felt the question settle in her chest. She knew the world would interpret this moment in many ways. Some would see her as a fighter, some as a disruptor, others as a symbol. But she wasn't trying to be any of those things. She lifted her eyes toward the morning sky outside the window. "What comes next," she said slowly, "is clarity. For everyone." The answer was simple, yet it carried the weight of something unfolding far beyond this gate, far beyond this morning, far beyond one torn boarding pass, and the world, now watching, waited for what that clarity would reveal. A faint tremor moved through the terminal, not from footsteps or rolling suitcases, but from the collective awareness settling deep into everyone's chest. It was the awareness that something larger than an airport misunderstanding was unfolding in real time. The atmosphere shifted from curiosity to something far more reflective. A quiet question began to take shape in the looks exchanged across the waiting area. What does it mean when a single moment forces everyone to reconsider what they allow, what they overlook, and what they excuse, Dr. Evelyn Hart stood at the center of that question without trying to. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't delivering a speech, yet somehow, her silence guided the room more assuredly than any announcement ever could. Cole Henders felt the weight of that silence most sharply. He stood a few feet back from the counter now, elbows tucked in, palms pressed together as if trying to keep himself from unraveling. He replayed the morning in his mind, each detail sharper than the last, the glance he had given her, the dismissive tone, the decision to tear the corner of her boarding pass. And now, the truth that stung the deepest, he had done it without thinking, because he believed no one would care. Behind him, Mallory Green watched the livestream number climb on Tanya's screen. The view count pushed past another threshold, and Mallory's stomach tightened. She had worked in airports long enough to know that most incidents blew over quickly. This was different. The world was watching not because the moment was dramatic, but because it was painfully familiar. A soft voice drifted toward Evelyn, pulling her from her thoughts. It belonged to a young woman seated near the window. She looked no older than 20, her hands clasped between her knees. "Dr. Hart," she said, hesitating as if she wasn't sure she had permission to speak. "My mom. She's gone through things like that for years. She always said she had to work twice as hard just to be treated fairly. Seeing you, it's making me think about all the time she stayed quiet." Evelyn turned toward her. The expression she offered wasn't pity or sorrow. It was recognition, a gentle acknowledgement of a shared experience across generations. "What your mother carried," Evelyn replied softly, "isn't small, and it shouldn't have been her burden alone." The young woman blinked rapidly, emotion rising to the surface. She nodded, wiping her cheek quietly. Near the seating row, Marcus Ellington watched the exchange with a thoughtful stillness. The uniform he wore made him part of the system on paper, but in moments like this he knew systems were made up of individual choices. Every policy he enforced depended on the humanity of the person carrying it out. He stepped closer, close enough for Evelyn to hear him without the crowd catching every word. "I wanted to tell you," he began slowly. "Years ago, my mother faced something at a hospital that changed how I see authority. She taught me that power comes with responsibility. Watching what's happening here today, it feels like the truth she carried is finally being spoken out loud." Evelyn looked at him. "Your mother raised a thoughtful man." Marcus lowered his eyes for a moment, humbled. Across the room, Tanya refocused her camera, her voice trembling slightly as she narrated for those watching. "The atmosphere here has shifted completely. No one is arguing anymore. People aren't pulling away from the moment. They're leaning in. It's like everyone is reflecting on something deeper than the airport walls." Her viewers flooded the chat. "This feels too real. I want to cry, and I don't even know why. Is this what dignity looks like when it's protected? Please keep streaming." Another ping rippled from phones across the gate. Another news alert. Another headline. Another wave of attention stretching beyond the terminal's walls. Mallory checked her tablet again, her voice low as she muttered, "Corporate wants an immediate report. They said they're seeing backlash from partner organizations, and one of them is Avalon Aeromed." The words landed heavily. Evelyn heard the name. She recognized it instantly. Avalon Aeromed was in direct partnership with her company for crisis response logistics. If they were calling Sky Continental for explanations, it meant the consequences of the incident were accelerating. She let out a slow breath. "Dr. Hart," Mallory added, almost pleading. "Is there anything we can do to fix this? Anything at all?" Evelyn didn't speak right away. She wanted to choose her words with care. What happened today shouldn't be repaired with shortcuts. She finally answered, "It should be corrected through understanding. That requires honesty, not convenience." Mallory's face tightened, caught between fear and a dawning realization that convenience had been the company's default for far too long. Evelyn turned slightly, her gaze shifting to a screen on the far wall. It reflected breaking news updates, headlines about corporate investigations and public reaction. She watched quietly as her name scrolled across the ticker. "I didn't ask for attention," she murmured to herself. Marcus heard her. Sometimes attention chooses the person who's prepared to carry it. Evelyn gave him a faint, thoughtful smile. Just then, a man in a dark suit stepped forward. He looked like someone who blended into office hallways and conference rooms without making noise. His tie was slightly crooked, as though he had rushed from somewhere. "Dr. Hart," he said gently. "I'm sorry to intrude. My name is Raymond Mullins. I didn't want to interrupt earlier, but I feel like I should tell you. I work with veterans advocacy programs. Many of the women I serve have experienced situations just like this. Watching you hold your ground will mean more to them than you know." Evelyn nodded with deep sincerity. "Thank you for telling me that." Raymond stepped back, unsure if he should stay or leave, before choosing to remain on the periphery of the group. The room fell into another quiet stretch, but it was a reflective quiet, not a tense one. People seemed to be processing not just Evelyn's story, but their own. The world outside the airport felt momentarily connected to this space, as though the walls were transparent and every untold memory in the room had come to sit beside them. Cole finally stepped forward, his posture stiff. "Dr. Hart," he began, his voice cracking at the edges. "I'd like to apologize, not just because corporate will expect it, not because people online are demanding it, but because," he exhaled slowly, "because I was wrong, and I didn't even see it until everyone else did. A few passengers turned to watch. I've treated people unfairly before," he continued, his voice heavy. "I didn't call it bias. I didn't call it anything. I told myself I was just enforcing rules. But today, I saw what it looks like when a person refuses to shrink from the moment, and I realized I've been shrinking other people without even noticing." Evelyn listened without interrupting. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Cole said, hands trembling slightly, "but I am asking for a chance to learn. Honestly, learn." Evelyn took in the sincerity in his expression. She saw not a polished apology, but a turning point, a beginning rather than an ending. "You can start," she said softly, "by seeing people before you judge them." Cole nodded quickly, swallowing hard. The overhead lights flickered gently, and a small breeze passed through the gate from the opening hallway. It carried the scent of fresh coffee from a nearby kiosk and the faint hum of airport announcements merging together. Tanya lifted her phone again. "To everyone watching," she said quietly, "this moment is bigger than what happened at this gate. It's touching people because it reflects what so many have lived through silently." Her viewers responded instantly. "This is powerful. She's changing the room without yelling. I've never cried watching a live stream before. Keep going. We're here." Evelyn's eyes moved across the gate area, taking in the faces, the empathy, the discomfort, the understanding, the shift. She realized something important. The room was no longer trembling from tension. It was trembling from awakening. The murmur inside Gate B27 began to thicken again, not with tension this time, but with a strange kind of anticipation. People glanced between their phones and Dr. Evelyn Hart, as though the next movement she made would carry meaning far beyond the confines of the terminal. Evelyn's phone buzzed quietly. The vibration was gentle, but the look that crossed her face hinted that this call was not one she could ignore. She stepped aside from the crowd, finding a small pocket of space near a row of unoccupied seats. Marcus watched her move and instinctively positioned himself at a respectful distance, ensuring she was undisturbed without closing in too tightly. Tanya turned her camera slightly away to give the moment privacy, though her viewers were already speculating, is she talking to her board? Maybe another airline reached out. This story keeps getting deeper. Evelyn lifted the phone to her ear. Her voice softened as she spoke. "I'm here." A pause. The quiet on the other end stretched long. Her shoulders straightened, her gaze focusing somewhere beyond the tall airport windows. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I saw the headlines." Her voice remained steady but carried a new gravity. Another pause. "I understand," she whispered. Her fingers tightened around the phone, the only outward sign that the conversation was stirring something deep inside her. Tanya, even from afar, sensed the shift. She whispered gently into her mic. "Something's different. I don't know who she's talking to, but her posture changed. It feels like this moment is becoming even bigger." Evelyn's breath exhaled slowly. "No," she said softly. "We don't make decisions out of anger. Not today. We make them out of principle." The passengers around her exchanged glances. Her words, even unamplified, carried. Cole stood near the counter, unsure whether he should stay or retreat. He felt as though he was witnessing a turning point that had been building not just this morning, but for years he had never questioned. Mallory, still tense and holding her tablet, watched Evelyn's silhouette with a mixture of dread and awe. Evelyn listened a moment longer, then closed her eyes. If that's what they've chosen, then we respond with clarity, not noise. Another quiet pause. "Yes," she murmured. "I'll address it, but not here. Not yet." She ended the call with a gentle tap. For a moment she simply held the phone in her hand, letting the weight of everything settle. Marcus stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is everything all right?" Evelyn inhaled, controlled and slow. "That depends on how we define all right." He nodded, sensing she needed room to speak at her own pace. She tucked her phone into her coat pocket and returned to the center of the gate area. Her expression was calm, but something about her presence felt fuller, like she had stepped into a truth she had been avoiding until now. Tanya angled the camera slowly toward her again. The viewers poured in. "She looks different. Something big is coming. I can feel it." Evelyn didn't raise her voice when she spoke, yet every ear in the gate seemed to turn toward her. "I want to thank you all for the space you've held today," she began, her voice warm but carrying a subtle firmness. "None of this was planned. I didn't expect attention. I didn't expect cameras, but moments like this reveal what we value as a society." A few passengers nodded. Others looked down in quiet reflection. "The call I just received," she continued softly, "was from my board chair." Mallory's heart seemed to drop. "They informed me that Avalon Aeromed is reconsidering their joint operations with Sky Continental. They want written assurance that our partnership still aligns with our company's values, and they want it today." A ripple moved through the crowd. Cole's breath caught. Tanya's viewers exploded with comments. "Avalon, that's huge. Sky Continental is in trouble. This is unreal." Evelyn paused, letting the weight of that reality settle gently but unmistakably. "So, I will need to respond," she said. "Not with outrage, not with threats, but with honesty." Mallory finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Dr. Hart, if you issue a response, can it give us a chance to fix this? To show we're trying." Evelyn turned toward her. There was no malice in her eyes, but neither was there easy forgiveness. "That depends on whether you're willing to change," Evelyn replied. "Not for corporate statements, not for optics, but for the people who walk through your gates every day." Mallory swallowed hard. Her silence was quieter than any apology she could have offered. Evelyn's gaze drifted briefly toward Tanya's camera. She didn't speak to the audience directly, but to the air, to the idea of accountability itself. "We're at a crossroads," she said. "It's not just about one incident. It's about how systems respond when someone says, 'This is not acceptable.'" Cole felt her words ripple through him like a quiet confession. He looked down at his hands, remembering every moment he had dismissed, overlooked, or minimized because it didn't touch him personally. Evelyn stepped closer to the counter, standing just inches from the place where her boarding pass had been torn. She brushed her fingertips against the surface lightly, almost as if acknowledging the moment's birthplace. "This wasn't just about a torn ticket," she said softly. "It was about who you thought I was allowed to be." Her eyes lifted to meet Cole's. He felt his throat tighten painfully. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. this time without the desperation of earlier. Instead, it came with acceptance. Acceptance that he couldn't undo what happened. Acceptance that he needed to learn. Acceptance that apology was only the first step. Evelyn nodded once, the gesture small but real. Then she turned to Marcus. "I may need your assistance shortly." He nodded with quiet strength. "I'm here." She glanced at the departure board. The flight number flickered, the time changing from on schedule to delayed. The room seemed to exhale collectively. Tanya lowered her camera slightly, speaking softly for her viewers. "This feels like the moment before a storm, but not a destructive storm, a clarifying one." Raymond Mullins stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Dr. Hart, if you do decide to make a statement later, people like the ones I work with, they'll feel seen, truly seen." Evelyn offered him a grateful nod. As she walked a few steps away to gather her thoughts, her mind traveled through years of moments she had buried. Comments brushed off as misunderstandings. Glances she pretended not to notice. Doors she had to knock on twice before they opened for others with a single tap. She had always kept her composure, always carried herself with poise, always tried to teach by example. But today had shown her something she hadn't wanted to admit. Grace alone wasn't enough. Sometimes clarity required consequence. She looked up toward the ceiling, as if grounding herself in the hum of the terminal. Her breath steadied. When she turned back to the group, her voice held a new tone. It was not louder, not sharper, but it carried the calm of a person who had reached a decision that could not be undone. "In a few minutes," she said quietly, "I will make a call that will determine the future of a $900 million partnership." Everyone froze. Even Tanya lowered her phone for a moment. Evelyn continued, "Before I do, I want to be sure I'm choosing the path that teaches, not just punishes." Her eyes swept across the room, settling briefly on each person who had stood with her, spoken to her, or listened to her story. Then she said, "And I want the choice to matter." A stillness fell, deeper than any that had come before. It was not the stillness of fear or shock. It was the stillness before a truth finally steps into the light. The atmosphere inside Gate B27 settled into a silence so attentive it felt almost sacred. Every sound grew clearer. The faint hum from overhead lights, the rolling sigh of air through vents, a distant announcement echoing from another concourse. Yet beneath it all, there was an unmistakable stillness, as if the room itself understood the weight of the moment approaching. "Doctor." Evelyn Hart remained near the center of the space, her presence grounding the shifting emotions around her. She had not raised her voice once, yet the room's attention stayed with her as steadily as if she were delivering an address from a stage. Tanya Brooks steadied her camera. Her live stream had passed numbers she had never seen in her years of reporting. She felt an ache in her chest, the kind that arrives when witnessing something fragile yet powerful. Her viewers sensed it too. The comments no longer came in frantic bursts, but in quiet waves. "It feels like she's carrying something heavy. She speaks like someone who has held back too long. Please stay live. Something important is happening." Cole Henders watched Evelyn with a mix of fear, guilt, and, strangely, gratitude. Her poise was illuminating parts of him he had never been willing to see. The truth was uncomfortable, but it was the kind that didn't let a person look away once revealed. Mallory Green still held her tablet against her chest like a shield. Her mind raced through corporate protocols, possible punishments, and everything she had ignored during her years working at the airport. She saw her role now not as a supervisor, but as a witness, one who must face her own complicity in a system that had demanded silence instead of integrity. It was Marcus Ellington who broke the stillness first, speaking in a soft voice, careful not to disturb the fragile balance around them. "Dr. Hart," he said, "if you need a separate room for the call, I can arrange an office." Evelyn shook her head gently. "No, I'll remain here." He nodded, understanding immediately. She was no longer simply responding to an incident. She was shaping a moment of truth, and that truth needed to be lived in full view, not hidden behind a door. Raymond Mullins, standing quietly near the right side of the gate, clasped his hands with a reverence that surprised even him. He had spent years advocating for people whose stories rarely reached national attention. Watching Evelyn, he felt something stir, hope that voices like hers might finally shift the landscape. Tanya whispered into her mic, "She's preparing. I can feel it. She's close to making the call." Her viewers responded with subdued urgency. "Tell her we support her. She's stronger than she knows. This feels historic." Evelyn stood still for a long moment, breathing slowly, letting the room settle into its quiet listening. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft enough to be intimate, yet clear enough to carry across every ear in the gate. "I want you all to understand something," she began. "When people talk about dignity, they often think it's something delicate. But dignity is not fragile. It's the foundation we stand on." The words resonated, gently at first, then with deepening strength. It's what gives us the courage to face moments like this without becoming what we're fighting. Cole lowered his gaze, ashamed yet grateful for the honesty she delivered without bitterness. Evelyn's eyes softened. But dignity is also something we protect for one another. And that's where systems often fail, not because they are broken, but because the people inside them forget how much their actions matter. Mallory felt the words press into her chest. She blinked hard to push back an unexpected sting of emotion. Evelyn continued, her tone steady. "This morning was not the first time I've faced something like this. It may not be the last. But I've reached a point in my life where I cannot allow silence to be my answer anymore." A pause followed, deep and reflective. "When my board called just now," she said, "they informed me that my company's partnership with this airline will be reviewed. It will require my decision, and that choice will carry consequences beyond me." A quiet gasp rose from somewhere in the room, quickly swallowed by the stillness. "I don't want consequence," Evelyn said. "I want understanding, but sometimes you cannot have one without the other." She took a breath, feeling the truth settle firmly inside her. "Before I make any decision, I need to address the one person whose actions began this." Cole flinched slightly, but he stepped forward. His voice trembled. "I'm here." Evelyn approached him slowly. She did not corner him or crowd him. She simply stood before him with a quiet presence that demanded honesty, not defensiveness. "Cole," she said softly, "I don't want an apology that exists only for the cameras." He nodded quickly. "I understand. I want you to tell me something," she continued gently. "Did you tear my boarding pass because you believed I didn't belong in first class, or because you didn't think I would challenge you if you did?" Cole swallowed hard. His voice came out hoarse. "Both. I didn't look at you with fairness. I assumed things I shouldn't have. And I thought you'd just move aside." Evelyn let his words settle. They were not comfortable, but they were true. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Honesty is the first real step." Cole exhaled shakily, relief and sorrow mingling together. Evelyn looked into his eyes with a calm that made him feel both exposed and guided. "I don't want you to carry shame. Shame doesn't teach. Responsibility does." Cole nodded, tears forming at the edges of his eyes. "I want you to grow from this," she said. "That's all." Cole bowed his head. "I'll try." Evelyn offered a faint, steady nod. Behind them, the room remained completely still, every heart caught between emotion and reflection. Even Tanya lowered her voice to a whisper. She's turning this moment into something human, something transformative. Evelyn stepped away slightly, returning to the center of the room. She reached into her coat pocket and touched her phone gently, almost ceremonially, as though feeling its weight before using it to shape the next chapter. "I will make the call shortly," she announced. "But first, I want to say something that matters to me." She lifted her chin slightly, her voice gaining a quiet resonance. "No matter what comes next, I want people to know that speaking up is not about punishment. It's about truth, and truth is what allows systems to heal." Her words landed with profound stillness. This is not about revenge. It is about alignment. It is about choosing integrity even when the world is watching. Across the room, heads nodded slowly, Tanya whispered to her viewers, "I've never seen someone lead a moment this gracefully." Evelyn's gaze softened as she added, "We can't rewrite everything that's happened, but we can choose what happens after." Her phone vibrated again. Another reminder, another decision asking to be made. She closed her hand around it, not with anger or urgency, but with quiet certainty. "When I make this call," she said gently, "it will not be a reaction. It will be a decision rooted in clarity." And for the first time since the morning began, Evelyn smiled. It was soft, subtle, but it held strength, because clarity had finally arrived. The air inside Gate B27 took on a quiet density, the kind that fills a room when people instinctively understand they are approaching a turning point. The sunlight outside had shifted to a late morning glow, casting long soft beams across the rows of muted blue airport seats. Dust danced gently in the warm shafts of light, rising and falling as if listening to the silence that had wrapped itself around the crowd. "Doctor." Evelyn Hart stood with her phone held loosely in her hand. She wasn't rushing toward the moment ahead, nor was she hesitating. She was simply preparing. She could feel a subtle pressure forming behind her ribs. Not fear, but the weight of responsibility taking its final shape. Marcus Ellington, now standing a few steps behind her, sensed the shift around them. He observed her posture, noticing how she breathed through each thought as though sorting through invisible threads. He admired that about her. The world had taught him many people reacted to injustice with noise. She answered it with clarity. Tanya Brooks spoke quietly into her microphone. "Everyone watching. Something profound is unfolding, but it's quiet, almost like a prayer before a step someone knows they have to take." Her voice trembled slightly, touched by the emotional gravity of the moment. Her viewers were sending comments that reflected the same unsettled anticipation. "I'm crying, and I don't know why." "She carries herself like she's holding all of us. This doesn't feel like news anymore. It feels personal." Mallory Green stood farther from the group now, unable to hide the heaviness in her expression. Her tablet screen glowed brightly, notifications layering over one another, the corporate response teams, legal advisors, public relations leads every department was scrambling. Her hands shook as she tried to keep up with the messages, but the truth unsettled her more deeply than the corporate chaos she had spent years telling herself that incidents like this were isolated moments, never expecting they might culminate in a reckoning she could no longer look away from. Cole Henders remained near the counter, trying not to appear lost yet having no place to stand that felt right. His apology earlier had been honest, but guilt had not left him. He watched Evelyn with a mix of admiration and remorse. He had expected anger. What she offered instead was a kind of truth that made him see himself differently. Raymond Mullins drifted closer to the edges of the crowd, folding his hands. He wasn't sure whether he should say more, yet something in him urged him to be present, to honor this moment with the quiet attention it deserved. Evelyn closed her eyes and inhaled slowly. She felt her heartbeat steady into a rhythm she recognized from boardrooms, emergencies, and difficult decisions. But this moment wasn't about business, nor strategy, nor optics. It was about integrity. She opened her eyes again and began speaking softly, as though she were thinking aloud. "When I was a little girl," she said, her voice low enough that those closest had to lean in. "My grandmother used to take me to the river that ran behind her house. She'd tell me that when water met resistance, it didn't force its way through. It shaped its path around the obstacle. Over time, the river always found the truth of where it needed to flow." Tanya raised her camera slightly, careful to keep her movements gentle. "My grandmother used to say," Evelyn continued, "that the hardest part of any decision was trusting that you could move with purpose without losing your compassion." The room held its breath. Evelyn looked down at her phone again. Her reflection faintly shone on the black screen, softened by the afternoon light. She saw her own eyes, calm, yet determined. She sensed the collective anticipation around her, but she didn't let it dictate her next steps. "Before I make this call," she said, "I want to understand the truth of this moment." She turned toward the passengers, her gaze welcoming, not searching. "This isn't only about one gate or one ticket. It's about the patterns we've allowed to continue quietly, the small dismissals that shape how people move through the world." A woman wearing a navy coat near the back nodded with misty eyes. She whispered, "Yes," almost involuntarily. Evelyn continued, "Many of us carry stories we don't speak about. Today was simply mine." Marcus glanced at Tanya, who whispered for her audience, "She's not addressing just the room. She's speaking to anyone who has ever been asked to shrink who they are." Cole felt a tightening in his throat. He stepped one small pace forward, not interrupting, just moving closer into the truth of his own role in the morning. "I want to ask you something," Evelyn said quietly, turning her gaze toward those gathered. "When you saw what happened today when the past was torn and assumptions were made, what did you feel?" The room was silent for a beat. Then a man with sandy hair near the window lifted his voice. "I felt ashamed that I didn't step in sooner." A woman added, "I felt tired, because I've seen too many moments like this in my life." Another passenger whispered, "I felt helpless." A young man said softly, "I felt angry." A grandmotherly voice chimed, "I felt seen." The responses formed a mosaic of shared emotion, weaving through the room like a gentle tide. Evelyn listened with deep attention, letting every word rest inside her. "This," she said at last, "is the beginning of understanding, not the end." She turned slightly and faced Cole fully. His eyes steadied, even in their vulnerability. "Cole," she asked gently, "are you willing to learn? Not because the world is watching, but because you understand the impact of what happened today." His voice was barely a whisper. "Yes. Are you willing to look at others differently from this day forward, even when you're tired or stressed or when no one is filming?" "Yes," he said again, a little stronger. "Are you willing," she continued softly, "to challenge the habits inside yourself that made today possible?" Cole swallowed. "I am." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Then that is the first step toward real change." Mallory lowered her tablet. The truth settled so heavily in her chest that she felt the faint sting of tears. She whispered, "We should have done better." Evelyn turned toward her. "Then begin now." These 3 words felt like both an invitation and a challenge. Tanya felt a tremor run through her fingers as she held the phone. She whispered to her audience, "This feels like transformation in real time." Raymond took a small step forward, his voice calm. "Doctor, Hart, the women I work with, they'll find strength in what you're saying." Evelyn offered him a soft nod. She inhaled once more, grounding herself. "I have heard what I needed to hear," she said gently. Her fingers curled around the phone, steady and sure. "I will make the call now." The room froze. Every face turned toward her. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, then tapped the screen, lifting the phone to her ear. The ringing tone carried a quiet tension. 1 ring. 2. 3. She whispered, "This is Dr. Hart. I've reached my decision." The words were calm, steady, and final. What she said next would determine the fate of a $900 million partnership. For a long moment, no one in Gate B27 seemed to breathe. Every person watched Dr. Evelyn Hart with a reverence that bordered on stillness, as though any movement might disrupt the gravity of what she was about to say. She stood with her phone pressed gently to her ear, posture steady, expression composed but resolute. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough to require the room to lean in. "I've reached my decision," she repeated softly, "and I want it on record so there is no ambiguity." A hushed murmur rippled through the waiting area, subtle but unmistakable. Tanya Brooks tightened her grip on her camera. Her audience filled the live stream chat with anxious messages. "What is she going to say? Please let us hear this. I'm shaking. This is bigger than one flight." Evelyn paused for a heartbeat, grounding herself in the silence that surrounded her, then continued. "Yes," she said. "I've considered every aspect. I've listened. I've reflected. And I'm choosing the option that aligns with our values, not the one that protects convenience." Her eyes drifted toward the floor, then gently toward the faces watching her, faces filled with worry, hope, and a sense that they were witnessing something with consequences far beyond these walls. She spoke slowly, enunciating each word with care. "I am terminating our partnership with Sky Continental." The words fell softly, but their impact hit the room like a distant, trembling quake. Mallory Green gasped so quietly that only the woman beside her heard. Cole Hender's knees wobbled, and he sank into the nearest chair, elbows pressing into his thighs as though bracing himself. Marcus Ellington closed his eyes just once, then opened them again with a solemn acceptance. On the other end of the call, Evelyn's board chair reacted with sober clarity. "I understand," the voice said. "This will create a ripple, a significant one." "It already has," Evelyn answered gently. "And it needed to." She listened to the quiet on the line before the chair finally added, "We trust you." The call ended. Evelyn lowered her phone, her hand steady even as the room absorbed the magnitude of her decision. It was not an impulsive choice, not a reaction born of wounded pride. It was something else entirely, an alignment, a return to principle, a declaration that respect was not negotiable. Tanya raised her voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Hart has just ended a $900 million contract." The chat flooded instantly. She really did it. My God, this woman is strength. This is history. Evelyn turned her phone face down on her palm, letting the meaning of her decision settle around her. She remained still for a few breaths, not letting triumph or regret rush in. She allowed only truth. Marcus approached slowly, speaking softly so she could choose how much of his voice she wanted to take in. "That was enormous," he said. Evelyn looked at him with calm eyes. It was necessary. He nodded once, deeply. "Are you all right?" he asked. She took a breath that left her chest slowly, then answered, "I will be." Her voice was soft but strong. Mallory finally stepped forward, her expression twisted between dread and awakening. "Dr. Hart," She tried, but the words splintered before they became a sentence. I don't know what to say. The entire company. This will shake everything. Evelyn studied her carefully. Change often begins with discomfort. Mallory swallowed, cheeks trembling. I never meant for this to escalate that far. You didn't mean for any of this to happen, Evelyn said, the words gentle, not accusatory, but systems don't change unless consequences reveal their weaknesses. Mallory blinked rapidly, tears beginning to gather. I've worked here for 12 years. I followed the rules. I didn't think silence could be so harmful. Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice to something personal. Silence feels harmless until you witness its cost. Mallory's voice cracked. What do we do now? Begin again, Evelyn said, with honesty. Those two words settled on Mallory like a weight and a balm at the same time. On the far side of the gate, Cole rose from his chair slowly. His steps were unsure, but he made his way toward Evelyn with a courage he hadn't known he possessed until now. He stopped before her, voice tremulous but sincere. You really canceled it. Evelyn met his gaze evenly. Yes. He rubbed his palms over his jeans, shaking slightly. Because of me, because of what happened, she corrected gently. Not just what you did, but what it represented. He swallowed. I never wanted to be the reason something this big fell apart. You were not the reason, Evelyn said softly. You were the moment. He frowned slightly, trying to understand. Moments, she explained, are opportunities for systems to reveal themselves. You didn't cause the river to change course. Cole, you showed where the water could no longer flow. He stared at her, struck by the unexpected mercy in her explanation. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered. You start, she said quietly, by becoming a better version of yourself than you were this morning. Cole's breath shook with emotion. He nodded, eyes glistening. A small voice rose from behind the seating area. It was a middle-aged woman holding her phone tightly to her chest. Dr. Hart, she said softly. I work in HR at another airline. What you did, it'll make its way through our standards. Policies don't change because people shout. They change because someone takes a stand that can't be ignored. Evelyn offered her a grateful nod. Another passenger added, You taught us something today. Another whispered, You gave us courage. Someone else said, What you did took strength I wish I had years ago. Evelyn felt the warmth of their support, not as validation, but as a reminder that accountability done with purpose has ripple effects far beyond the moment of truth. Tanya spoke quietly for her live stream. It's rare to see leadership like this. Leadership that costs something. Raymond stepped forward, voice filled with respect. You just changed the conversation for so many people who never had the power to. Evelyn turned slightly toward him. Power means nothing if it's afraid to stand with the vulnerable. The room seemed to hush even more deeply. For a moment, Evelyn allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had done. $900 million, years of planning, countless people affected, the future of collaborations that had seemed set in stone. But then she remembered her grandmother's river, and she felt peace. She picked up her bag slowly, then spoke in a tone that was soft yet carried finality. I will remain here until the situation is resolved, but the contract stands terminated, and I hope it leads to something better than what existed this morning. Her words fell gently, not as a blow, but as a seed, something that would grow, something that would change, something that would not be forgotten. For several seconds after Evelyn Hart's decision settled into the air. The entire gate existed in a suspended hush. It was not shock anymore, Not disbelief. It was something heavier, more contemplative, as if the walls themselves understood that a threshold had been crossed. Outside the windows, a plane taxied slowly across the runway, sunlight glinting gently across its silver surface. The world outside continued its steady pace, unaware that inside Gate B27 lives and systems were being quietly reshaped. Evelyn stood with her phone still in her hand, letting the enormity of her choice seep through her fingers. Her breath was calm, but the silence within her carried the solemnity of someone who had just stepped into a deeper version of truth. Tanya Brooks lowered her camera by a fraction, her voice trembling slightly as she narrated to the thousands watching. She did it. She really did it. She canceled the entire partnership, and she's standing here with the same grace she had before any of this began. Her viewers responded in waves. I've never seen courage like this. She's a different kind of leader. Why is this making me cry? This is what accountability looks like. Marcus Ellington stepped closer, not intruding, but offering a steady anchor in the periphery. If you need a moment alone, he offered gently, I can give you space. Evelyn shook her head. No, I want to stay present, especially now. Her voice carried no strain, only quiet resolve. Behind her, a man in a business suit stood and approached her with a cautious respect. He looked to be in his early 50s, with streaks of gray at his temples and tiredness in his eyes. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said softly. Evelyn met his gaze with openness. You're not. My name is Samuel Trent, he said. I handle investments for a medical nonprofit. We've been following Sky Continental's corporate ethics for years. What you did, it will influence standards across the industry. Evelyn offered a humble nod. If it leads to improved treatment for travelers, then the cost is worth it. Samuel exhaled slowly, as though releasing something he'd been holding for far too long. I wish someone like you had been there 20 years ago when my sister was turned away from a gate despite having a full ticket. She cried the whole flight home. She never traveled again. Evelyn felt a tightness in her chest at his words. I'm sorry she endured that. She wasn't the only one, he whispered. But today, it feels like a door opened. Evelyn's eyes softened with empathy. Then, let's make sure it stays open. Samuel nodded before stepping back, wiping the corner of his eyes discreetly. Mallory Green stood leaning against a seating row, her posture slouched, her fingers trembling slightly. She felt the collapse of something she had depended on for years, a belief that her job required obedience, not discernment. She finally found the courage to speak again, though her voice quivered. Dr. Hart, I don't know how to fix myself in all this. Evelyn turned toward her. The gentleness in her expression didn't dilute the truth behind her eyes. Mallory, fixing yourself isn't the goal. Growing beyond who you were this morning is. Mallory swallowed, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. I don't think I ever realized how many moments I brushed aside. How many people I failed because it was easier to follow procedure than to follow conscience. Now you know, Evelyn said softly. That knowledge is painful, but it's also the beginning. Mallory pressed a hand to her chest as if something inside her had cracked open. I want to do better. Then do better, Evelyn said, her voice gentle but firm. Starting now. Mallory nodded, trembling, but with newfound sincerity. Cole Henders, standing only a few feet away, watched this exchange with a strange sense of kinship. For the first time in his life, he felt like the truth was asking something of him personally, not punishment, but responsibility. He took a slow step forward. His throat seemed tight, but he pushed through it. Dr. Hart, he said quietly. I've been thinking about what I'll take from today. Evelyn turned to him, giving him her full attention. I realized, Cole said, voice cracking, that apologies don't change anything by themselves. They're just words unless I let them remake something inside me. Evelyn nodded. That's true. I don't want to be the person I was this morning. He continued. I don't want to hide behind stress or protocol or habit. I want to be someone who sees people. Everyone. Evelyn felt a small warmth unfold in her chest. That desire is the soil where change can grow. Cole lowered his gaze, blinking away tears. You deserved better from me. And from this airline. Many people do, she replied gently. But today isn't just about failure. It's about awakening. As Cole stepped back, a quiet murmur of support filled the room. People were no longer observing. They were participating, reflecting, understanding. It was Raymond Mullins who stepped forward next, his voice soft but steady. Dr. Hart, he began, the women I've spent years advocating for, many of them never had the power to respond the way you just did. They were told to be grateful for whatever seat they got, to avoid drawing attention, to keep peace at any cost. Evelyn listened, her heart tightening. But you, Raymond said, his voice thickening with emotion. You reminded us what dignity looks like when it refuses to shrink. Evelyn held his gaze with quiet appreciation. Thank you for saying that. Raymond nodded, blinking rapidly to keep his composure. Near the window, the young woman who had spoken earlier now approached with timid steps. She seemed even younger up close, barely in her 20s, with a nervous tremor in her hands. Dr. Hart, she said softly. I called my mother just now. I told her what happened here. Her voice wavered. She cried. She said she never believed she would see someone stand up the way she wished she could have. A gentle ache rose in Evelyn's chest. Please tell her this, Evelyn whispered, stepping closer. Tell her her strength reached this room through you. The young woman sobbed, covering her mouth, overwhelmed. Evelyn placed a hand gently on her shoulder. And tell her she deserved every bit of respect she never received. The girl nodded, tears falling freely. Tanya's live stream captured the moment, and her viewers wrote, I can't stop crying. This is healing something in me. She's giving people back their voice. Evelyn stood again in the middle of the gate, letting the energy of the space wrap around her. What had begun as an act of personal integrity had become something larger, a collective reckoning, a mirror held up to a society long trained to look away from small, everyday harms. She did not smile. She simply breathed. This decision, she said softly, addressing everyone, was not made to destroy. It was made to illuminate. The room grew still once more. And illumination, she added, always reveals both cracks and possibilities. Her phone buzzed again, vibrating softly in her hand. Another message from her board, another reminder of the magnitude of what she had done. Evelyn didn't flinch. She lifted her face toward the room. I hope today becomes a beginning, she said, not an ending. And for the first time, the room seemed to exhale. The atmosphere inside Gate B27 slowly shifted into something calmer, almost reflective, like the quiet after a rainstorm when the earth pauses to breathe. People settled back into their seats, but their eyes did not leave Dr. Evelyn Hart. She stood near the window now, the afternoon sun resting gently on her shoulders as though the light itself recognized what she had done. Outside, an aircraft ascended in the distance, its wings cutting clean lines through the sky. Its slow climb mirrored the rising clarity within the room. Every person present felt it, even if they could not articulate it. Change had arrived without warning, slipping under the door like a draft, reshaping the temperature of everything it touched. Evelyn lowered her gaze to her phone again. Messages from her board filled the screen. Some expressed concern. Some expressed admiration. A few were frightened by the repercussions. But one message caught her breath in a quiet, unexpected way. It was from her father. He rarely texted. He was a man who preferred silence, a man molded by decades that had taught him to endure more than to speak. His message contained only 4 words. "I'm proud of you." For a moment, Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the weight of those words settle inside her. They grounded her more deeply than the entire crowd watching her. She remembered nights long ago when her father returned home exhausted from construction work, dust still clinging to his collar, yet he always sat at the kitchen table and asked, "What did you learn today?" He never asked who doubted her, never asked who underestimated her, only what she learned. He believed learning was how one built a life durable enough to carry both pain and hope. Tanya Brooks, noticing Evelyn's stillness through her lens, moved closer. There was no urgency in her footsteps now, only reverence. "Dr. Hart," she said softly, "people around the world are waiting for your next words." Evelyn opened her eyes, calm and steady. "I don't have next words," she replied gently. "Not yet." Tanya lowered the camera halfway, her expression softening. Silence can be powerful too. Evelyn breathed in the truth of that. "Silence is where consequences settle," she murmured. "And today needs that." A group of passengers near the back shifted nervously, as though unsure whether they were supposed to applaud, apologize, or simply witness. They finally chose the third option. Witnessing felt closer to honesty. Marcus Ellington approached Evelyn once more, but not as a protector, more like someone seeking clarity. "You know," he said, voice low, "when I heard you say Phase 2 earlier, it hit me harder than I expected. Not because of the scale of what you did, but because of the calm behind it." Evelyn studied his face. "Calm doesn't come from absence of fear," she said. "It comes from knowing which fear deserves your energy." Marcus nodded. "And you weren't afraid of losing money." "No," she replied, a faint sorrow threading through her tone. "What I fear most is letting the world teach me to shrink." Her words struck Marcus with surprising force. He swallowed, feeling something loosen inside him. "Thank you for not shrinking." Evelyn offered him a soft nod. In another corner, Mallory Green remained seated, her hands clasped tightly together. She kept replaying a single moment over and over the instant she told Evelyn to move to the economy line. It felt like watching a version of herself she no longer recognized. She finally rose from her seat and walked toward Evelyn with hesitant steps. "Dr. Hart," she whispered, her voice nearly breaking. "I know you've already said more kindness than I deserve, but I need to say something out loud." Evelyn turned to her gently. "For years," Mallory continued, "I convinced myself that following what the system demanded was the safest path. I thought if I just stayed in line, nothing terrible would happen to me." Evelyn waited, the silence between them patient. "But today," Mallory said, trembling, "I realize the price of safety can be someone else's dignity, and I don't want to carry that anymore." Evelyn's gaze softened deeply. Pain and compassion intertwined. "Then don't," she said quietly. "The moment you understand the cost of something, you get to decide whether to keep paying it." Mallory pressed her lips together, holding back tears. "Do you really think I can change?" Evelyn answered without hesitation. "Yes, but only because you're asking the question honestly." Mallory wiped her cheeks, nodding, and stepped aside, a little steadier than before. From the seating area, Cole Henders watched the exchange. It stirred something in him, something unexpected, something vulnerable. He had always believed leadership meant maintaining control, presenting a polished front. But watching Evelyn taught him something different. Leadership wasn't loud or defensive. It was clear. He approached her slowly. "Doctor?" "Hart," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I've ever seen someone hold power the way you just did." Evelyn looked at him with quiet sincerity. "Power isn't something I hold. It's something I choose how to use." Cole swallowed hard. "I wish I'd understood that earlier in my life." "You understand it now," she replied gently, "and understanding now is better than never." He nodded, feeling something unexplainably cleansing in her words. Raymond Mullins approached next, carrying an energy of profound gratitude. "If my sister were alive," he said softly, "she would have wanted to thank you. She spent years thinking being quiet was the safest way to survive." Evelyn bowed her head slightly. "Quiet can be survival, but it shouldn't have to be." Raymond's eyes glistened. "Your choices today will help reshape what survival looks like for people who look like you. And for people who look like me." Evelyn placed a hand over her heart. "Then I'm glad today happened, even if it came at a cost." Raymond stepped back, deeply moved. Near the charging station, Samuel Trent watched Evelyn with the depth of someone who had lived through decades of slow progress and sudden setbacks. When he finally approached her, he did so with a gentleness that made his voice feel like a soft blanket laid over a wound. "What you did," he said, "might feel heavy, but don't mistake heaviness for burden. Sometimes heaviness is simply what truth feels like when it's finally spoken." Evelyn breathed slowly, letting his words settle into the quiet spaces of her mind. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that." Samuel nodded and stepped back, giving her space once more. The entire gate was quiet now. Not tense, not fearful, just quiet in the way a room becomes when everyone is finally paying attention to the same truth. Evelyn looked once more toward the large windows, where another aircraft glided past, leaving shimmering trails in the afternoon light. She watched it for several moments, her thoughts drifting to the years behind her years filled with rooms she wasn't supposed to enter, elevators she wasn't expected to step into, decisions she wasn't predicted to influence. She had entered anyway. She had stepped in anyway. And today, she had proven something to herself that she didn't realize she needed confirmed. She was done shrinking. She turned her face toward the people in the room, her voice gentle but unmistakably firm. "Today wasn't about winning," she said. "It was about remembering who we are allowed to be." No one moved, no one interrupted, everyone listened. Evelyn's expression softened into the smallest, warmest hint of a smile. "That's all I ever wanted," she said, "for all of us." The room absorbed her words like soil taking in long overdue rain. Outside, the sky brightened. Inside, so did they. The light inside Gate B27 softened as the afternoon stretched toward early evening. The glow passing through the wide windows thickened into a warm amber, bathing every chair, every traveler, every quiet reflection in a muted gentleness. It was the kind of light that made people slow down, inhale more deeply, and remember things they often tried to outrun. Dr. Evelyn Hart stood near a row of seats, her posture calm, yet her breath carried a subtle heaviness, the natural gravity that follows a decision which will echo long after the moment has passed. Her phone buzzed again in her hand. She glanced at it, then let the screen go dark. Not every message needed an immediate answer. Not today. A small, hesitant voice reached her from behind. "Dr. Hart, could I speak with you?" Just for a moment it belonged to a young gate attendant, barely in his 20s, with shy eyes and a badge that read, "Noah Parker." He approached slowly, as if afraid his footsteps might disturb something sacred. Evelyn turned toward him, offering a small, reassuring nod. "Of course." Noah swallowed. Gathering courage. "I wasn't here when everything happened. I was on break. I just came back a little while ago, but everyone's talking about you." Evelyn listened patiently. I wanted to say thank you," Noah continued, voice trembling. "My mom flies every month for medical treatments. She's been judged more times than I can count. People assume things from the moment they see her wheelchair. Your decision today, it made me wish she were here to see someone finally say enough." Evelyn's gaze softened with warmth. "Tell her she doesn't need to witness it to be included in it." Noah's breath hitched. She'd be really moved by that. Evelyn placed a gentle hand over his. "I hope her next flight is met with more respect than her last." Noah nodded quickly, as though committing her words to memory. A few seats away, Tanya Brooks adjusted her microphone, lowering her voice as she addressed her audience. "For everyone still watching," she murmured. "The energy in this room has shifted again. It's quieter, but not because people are afraid. It's because they're reflecting on themselves, on what they've accepted, on what they've allowed." The comment section flooded instantly. "I feel that. She's right. I'm thinking about every time I stayed silent. This is hitting deep." Meanwhile, Marcus Ellington positioned himself near the window, his eyes tracing the slow arc of a plane lifting into the sky. He seemed lost in thoughts he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. After several moments, he approached Evelyn with the cautious steps of someone carrying a question that mattered. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I've worked beside you for years. I've watched you navigate boardrooms where your presence was underestimated before you even opened your mouth. I know strength when I see it. But today, I saw something else." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, inviting him to continue. "I saw how lonely leadership can be." Silence stretched gently between them. Evelyn let out a slow breath. "It is lonely sometimes." Marcus nodded. "But it shouldn't be." The vulnerability in his tone surprised her. She replied softly, "Loneliness isn't always a void. Sometimes it's the space you need to grow." Marcus lowered his eyes thoughtfully. "Still, no one should have to be strong alone." For a moment, Evelyn felt emotion rise in her throat, a quiet ache she didn't show. She gave him a gentle smile, letting the gratitude settle in the air without needing to name it. Behind them, Mallory Green sat in one of the corner seats, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had been quiet for several minutes, wrestling with something deep within her. Finally, she stood and approached Evelyn once again. "Dr. Hart," she said softly, "could I ask you something? It's personal." Evelyn turned toward her with composed openness. "Yes." Mallory's chin trembled. "How do you live with the weight of knowing people expect you to be strong all the time?" Evelyn took her time before answering. "I don't carry that weight," she said softly. "I carry the expectation I have for myself. That is the only one I answer to." Mallory blinked rapidly. "But aren't you afraid sometimes, afraid that speaking out will cost you something precious?" Evelyn's gaze deepened, and her voice lowered as though sharing something tender. "Courage doesn't erase fear. Courage gives fear a place to sit that isn't in the driver's seat." Mallory let out a trembling breath, her shoulders loosening. "I never learned that." "You're learning now," Evelyn said gently. Mallory covered her mouth, overwhelmed by a quiet sob. She stepped back, needing a moment to compose herself. On the other side of the gate, Cole Henders watched all of this with a conflicted expression. Shame still lingered in him, but something else had begun to form, something unfamiliar. He approached Evelyn cautiously. "Dr. Hart," he began. "I've been trying to find a way to express what I'm feeling without sounding like I'm trying to save myself." Evelyn regarded him with measured calm. "Honesty doesn't need saving." Cole let out a hollow, shaky breath. When I look back at my actions today, they feel so small compared to the harm they carried. They weren't small, Evelyn said quietly. They were evidence. Cole looked pained. Evidence of my flaws. Evidence of a system that trained your flaws? Evelyn corrected gently. That doesn't absolve you, but it explains the roots. Cole stared at her, emotion thick in his eyes. I want to be better. Evelyn nodded. Then begin. I'm scared I'll fail. You will, she said softly. And then you'll try again. That's how better works. Cole trembled, tears gathering in his eyes before he quickly looked away. Thank you for not giving up on people. I don't give up on growth, she replied, not even when it scares me. Cole stepped back slowly, processing her words as if they were sunlight thawing something frozen in him. A quiet settled again, but it was not heavy. It was contemplative, the kind of quiet that makes people notice their own heartbeat. Hours seemed to fold into moments. The sun lowered further, painting the room in deeper amber. The gate announcements echoed faintly through the terminal. But inside B27, everything felt insulated from the usual world. A woman in her 50s approached Evelyn next. She wore a gray business coat and carried the kind of gentle dignity earned through years of endurance. Dr. Hart, she said, her voice soft and steady. I want you to know that you changed something in me today. I spent decades teaching myself not to take up space, but when you stood there, you reminded me that shrinking doesn't keep us safe. It keeps us small. Evelyn's eyes warmed deeply. I'm glad you remembered your size. The woman pressed a hand over her heart, tears gathering. Thank you. As she stepped away, Evelyn finally allowed herself to sit down. She folded her hands in her lap and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything drift through her. Raymond approached last, standing quietly beside her until she opened her eyes. Dr. Hart, he said, voice gentle, you know what today became. She waited. A mirror. He continued. For everyone. For the airline. For the country. Evelyn looked toward the window once more. The last traces of sunlight stretched thin like gold threads across the runway. Then, I hope, she whispered, that the reflection inspires change. Raymond smiled softly. It already has. Evelyn breathed in deeply, then exhaled, letting her shoulders settle into a rare softness. The storm had passed, but the awakening had only begun. Evening settled gently over Cedar Valley International Airport, softening the sharp edges of the day. The sunlight that once flooded Gate B27 had dissolved into a muted haze, leaving only the warm glow of overhead lights and the quiet rustle of travelers finding comfort in blankets or coffee cups. Everything felt slower now, more deliberate, as if time itself had chosen to move with caution. Doctor. Evelyn Hart remained seated, her hands resting loosely in her lap. Though her posture was composed, an invisible weight pressed gently at her shoulders. It was not regret. It was the humbling awareness of what courage required and what it often cost. She gazed at the darkening runway beyond the window. Planes taxied in slow arcs, their lights blinking steadily like small promises. She watched their movements with a quiet steadiness, letting the sound of their engines remind her she was still grounded, still human, still learning. Tanya Brooks stepped closer, lowering her voice so the live stream wouldn't intrude too much. Dr. Hart, people are still watching. The stream hasn't dropped below 50,000 viewers in hours. Evelyn turned slightly, offering a gentle nod. What are they saying? Tanya hesitated. Some are reflecting on their own experiences. Some are apologizing for times they stayed silent. A few said you reminded them of who they wanted to be when they were young. A faint sadness passed across Evelyn's face, soft but unmistakable. I hope today didn't just make them remember, she said. I hope it made them choose. Her voice carried a fragile sincerity, the kind that made Tanya lower her gaze in respect. Across the room, Cole Henders remained standing near a charging station. He stared at his reflection in the airport window, barely recognizing the man who watched him back. Guilt still weighed on him, but something had shifted beneath it. He inhaled deeply, gathering the remnants of courage he never knew he had. Cole approached Evelyn slowly. "Dr. Hart," he said softly, "I've been thinking about what comes next for me." Evelyn looked at him fully. "And what have you decided?" Cole swallowed hard. "I'm going to request reassignment to a department that handles service training. I want to help rebuild what I broke, not because anyone asked me to, because it's what needs to be done." Evelyn considered his words in silence for a moment. "Rebuilding," she said gently, "isn't about fixing the past. It's about shaping a future that doesn't repeat it." Cole nodded. "I want to be part of that future." Evelyn's expression warmed with a restrained, hopeful softness. "Then begin with honesty. And stay consistent." He exhaled shakily. "I will." He stepped aside just as Mallory Green approached, her face pale but her eyes clearer than they had been all day. She held a folded piece of paper in her hands, gripping it tightly as though it were a lifeline. "Dr. Hart," she began, her voice quiet but steady. "I wrote something. I don't know if it's enough, but I needed to say it." Evelyn nodded gently, allowing her the space to continue. Mallory unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. "I wrote an official statement," she said. "It's an admission of my role today and a request for disciplinary review. I've avoided accountability for too long, and I don't want to run anymore." Evelyn listened, her eyes soft but unwavering. Mallory looked up, tears gathering. "But I also wrote something else. A promise to myself that I won't ever let silence direct my choices again." Evelyn let her breath settle before speaking. "Mallory, accountability is not a door shutting. It's a door opening." Mallory covered her eyes with one hand, her voice cracking. "Thank you for not meeting my failure with cruelty." "You didn't need cruelty," Evelyn said. "You needed truth." Mallory nodded through her tears and stepped back, shoulders trembling but lighter. Not far from them, Samuel Trent approached with slow, thoughtful steps. He carried his briefcase in one hand, but he held it gently, as though he had no desire to bring the business world into this quiet, fragile moment. "Dr. Hart," he said kindly, "I think you should know something. I texted the partners at my nonprofit. I told them what you did today. They want to meet you. Not for a contract, for conversation." Evelyn raised her brows slightly. "Conversation about what?" "About how corporations can be shaped," Samuel said. "About how systems can change. About how accountability can be built into culture instead of being forced upon it." A slow, thoughtful breath left Evelyn's throat. "That sounds meaningful." "It is," Samuel said. "And they believe you're the person to lead that dialogue." Evelyn looked down for a moment, touched by the offer but humbled by its weight. "Thank you, Samuel." He bowed his head slightly, then stepped away, allowing her space. Minutes passed quietly. The soft hum of the terminal wrapped around them like a blanket. People in the gate looked at Evelyn with quiet admiration, but they no longer watched her with shock or urgency. They watched her the way one watches a lighthouse, steady, determined, refusing to dim even when the sea turns stormy. Raymond Mullins approached next, his voice warm with reflection. "Dr. Hart, I spoke with a few people outside this gate," he said. "Word has spread. People are calling this a turning point." Evelyn gave a faint smile, Sometimes turning points are just people deciding to stop turning away. Raymond chuckled softly. You know, I've met women with courage, but I don't think I've met anyone who wore courage as quietly as you. Evelyn looked back at the window, her eyes tracing the fading streaks of gold on the horizon. Courage doesn't need to be loud, she said. It just needs to be lived. Raymond nodded, moved by the softness in her tone. As the energy in the room settled once more, a small sound rose from behind them, soft footsteps, careful and polite. A woman in her 60s approached, wearing a floral scarf and carrying a well-worn leather handbag. Her eyes carried decades of stories. Dr. Hart, she said gently, I don't want to take much of your time. I just wanted to say that I've watched the world change very slowly over my lifetime. Sometimes so slowly that I doubted it was moving at all. Evelyn listened with patient warmth. But today, the woman continued, her voice trembling slightly. Today felt like watching a door open that I've been knocking on for years. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Thank you for saying that. The woman placed a hand over her heart. Keep opening doors, even when people pretend they don't hear the knock. Evelyn's breath wavered, touched deeply by the simple, profound hope in her words. As the woman walked away, Evelyn leaned back in her seat. For the first time in hours, she let her shoulders soften. The emotional weight of the day pressed against her chest, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was grounding. Marcus crossed his arms gently and watched her from a short distance, then approached quietly. You've done more in one afternoon than most do in a lifetime, he said. Evelyn shook her head. I just acted when the moment called for it. That's exactly what most people struggle to do. Marcus replied. Evelyn looked away for a moment, her gaze settling on the far end of the terminal where night had begun to gather. Marcus, she said softly, do you ever wonder if one decision can ripple farther than we meant it to? All the time, he answered. But I also know that the decisions we regret least are the ones aligned with our integrity. Evelyn breathed slowly, letting his words sink into her bones. In that quiet moment, something eased inside her. Not resolution, not relief, but acceptance. The day had changed everything. For her, for those who witnessed it, for a system that needed to see its own reflection. And as the evening deepened, she felt one truth rise gently within her. The hardest part wasn't the decision itself, it was everything that would follow. Night settled fully around Cedar Valley International Airport, wrapping the terminal in a soft, muted calm. The echoes of the day lingered like warm embers, glowing faintly in the hearts of those still gathered at Gate B27. Conversations had dwindled into gentle murmurs. Some passengers sipped lukewarm coffee. Others leaned back against their seats, absorbed in thought. A few simply watched Dr. Evelyn Hart, sensing that something meaningful was still unfolding within her. The loudspeaker chimed softly, announcing boarding for a flight at a nearby gate. The voice was calm, steady, unaware of how much the world inside B27 had shifted. Evelyn listened to the announcement with a slow inhale. The simple call to board felt strangely grounding after the storm that had passed. She looked down at her hands resting in her lap. They were steady again. No tension, no trembling, just steady, like someone who had walked through fire and discovered that the flames revealed strength she hadn't known she possessed. Marcus Ellington took a seat next to her, lowering himself gently as if not to disturb her thoughts. He waited a moment before speaking. You've been quiet, he said softly. Evelyn kept her gaze lowered. I'm considering what comes next. Marcus nodded, not pushing further. Whatever comes, you won't face it alone. For a moment. Evelyn allowed herself to lean slightly back into her seat, letting the truth of his words settle over her. She was used to navigating battles alone, used to carrying her armor in silence. But tonight, she felt something different. Not dependence, but shared space, shared understanding. She lifted her eyes toward the window. The runway lights stretched out like a path carved into the darkness, guiding the night flights as they rose into the sky. "I made a choice today," she whispered. "A choice that will follow me for a very long time." Marcus turned his head just enough to glimpse her expression. "Yes," he said, "but it was the right choice." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, letting the quiet wrap around her like a blanket. Right choices still leave shadows. "Shadows," Marcus said gently, "are proof you're standing in the light." Evelyn slowly opened her eyes. His words loosened something deep inside her, something she had held tight for years. She didn't say anything, but Marcus felt her gratitude all the same. A moment later, Tanya Brooks approached, camera finally resting at her side. The live stream had ended 15 minutes ago. She had shut it off not because the audience waned, but because the moment no longer belonged to the internet. It belonged to the people in the room. "Tanya," Evelyn said softly, acknowledging her presence. Tanya offered her a warm, almost protective smile. "Dr. Hart, if you ever decide to speak publicly about what happened today, I'll be honored to help you tell the story." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Maybe one day, whenever you're ready." Tanya replied, "The world will listen." Evelyn nodded, and Tanya quietly stepped away, respecting the stillness that had settled. A few steps behind Tanya, Cole Henders watched Evelyn with an expression that carried both humility and quiet determination. He walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "Dr. Hart," he said gently, "I know you've already given me more grace than I deserved, but I want to say one last thing before my shift ends." Evelyn turned her attention fully to him. "I'm going to remember this day for the rest of my life," Cole said. "Not because I failed, but because your response taught me what accountability should feel like. It wasn't punishment, it was clarity." Evelyn's eyes softened. Clarity is what begins transformation. Cole took a deep, steadying breath. "Thank you for seeing the part of me that still had a chance." She offered him a faint, sincere nod. "Make something good out of that chance." "I will," he said quietly. "I promise." As Cole stepped back, Mallory Green approached next. She had washed her face, tucked her hair neatly, and folded her statement paper into her pocket. Her eyes were still red, but steadier, more sure of herself. "Dr. Hart," Mallory said, voice delicate but resolute. "I emailed my statement to HR. I also asked to be reassigned to customer advocacy." Evelyn's eyebrows lifted with quiet surprise. "That's a meaningful choice." Mallory nodded. "I don't want to run from the work. I want to stand inside it." Evelyn regarded her with a warm gravity. "Then you're already becoming the person you hoped to be." Mallory's lips trembled, but she smiled. "Thank you for speaking to me like someone who could change." "You can," Evelyn said. "Most people can, if they choose to." Mallory pressed a hand to her heart and stepped aside, her posture hopeful. Not far away. Raymond Mullins approached, his footsteps slow with contemplation. He looked at Evelyn with the softness of someone who had seen trauma and resilience share the same breath. "Dr. Hart," he said quietly. "I called the women at the shelter. I told them what happened. They cried. They said you gave them something they'd lost a long time ago." Evelyn tilted her head. "What was that? Proof?" Raymond said. "Proof that the world still listens to a black woman when she tells the truth." A small ache rose in Evelyn's throat. She looked down for a moment, then back at him. "Thank you for telling me." Raymond offered her a gentle nod, then stepped back into the soft hum of the gate. A moment later, a new voice spoke up behind her. "Dr. Hart." It was Noah Parker, the young gate attendant. He held a warm cup of tea in his hands. "I thought you might need something calming," he said shyly. "It's chamomile." Evelyn accepted the cup with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Noah." He brightened. "I hope your evening gets easier." She nodded. "It already has." As Noah walked away, Evelyn took a slow sip of the tea. The warmth spread through her chest. Relaxing muscles she had forgotten were tense. Silence settled again, soft and full. Finally, after several long minutes, an announcement echoed gently across the room. "Final boarding call for Flight 782 departing from Gate B27. Evelyn and Marcus exchanged a quiet glance. Marcus stood. "Are you ready?" Evelyn rose slowly, gathering her bag. "I think I am." She walked toward the boarding lane, stopping once to glance back at the room. People watched her with soft, reflective eyes, not as a spectacle, not as a headline, but as a mirror. A reminder. A living note of what courage could look like. She offered the gate one final nod of gratitude, not for the hurt, not for the chaos, but for the clarity it revealed. Then she stepped forward. The jet bridge was dim and still, filled with the familiar hum of airflow and metal. Her footsteps echoed lightly as she walked, grounding each step in intention. By the time she reached the aircraft door, she felt her heart steady again. Quieter than before, but stronger. The flight attendant at the entrance met her with a respectful, earnest smile. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Hart." Evelyn returned the smile gently. "Thank you." She found her seat near the window. The cabin lights were low, casting soft shadows that felt almost peaceful. She settled in, closed her eyes briefly, and exhaled a long, cleansing breath. Outside the window, the runway lights shimmered against the dark, forming a path toward the horizon. The engines whirred to life, vibrating gently beneath her feet. As the plane began its slow roll forward, Evelyn rested her hand against the window. The glass was cool beneath her palm. A quiet whisper formed in her chest. Today mattered. Not because it had been loud, but because it had been true. As the aircraft lifted into the night sky, the world below faded into a constellation of lights. And Evelyn Hart, with all her strength and softness, stepped quietly into tomorrow. Evelyn Hart's story reminds us of something that seems simple, but is incredibly difficult living up to your values, even when the price is very high. In life, there are moments when we are forced to choose between familiar safety and the truth that haunts us. Evelyn chose the truth, not to challenge anyone, but to avoid betraying herself. The biggest lesson is not that she canceled a $900 million deal, but that she dared to believe that a person's dignity should never be determined by the eyes or attitudes of others. For older audiences, perhaps what touches the deepest is Evelyn's calmness, a calmness that comes from experience, from years of learning to stand firm in the face of injustice. She didn't do it to become a hero, she just chose not to shrink back again. We all have times when we choose to stay silent and let things pass, but sometimes, just standing up once, just saying "I deserve respect" once, is enough to change your whole life. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you feel inspired, please like and share and subscribe to the channel to spread more positive values. You are the reason we continue to tell humane stories.